So hello, good afternoon from Singapore. My name is Aisha Al-Sarihi. I am a research fellow at the Middle East Institute at the NUS. I'm very delighted to welcome you all to this webinar titled The COP27 and the Middle East, from Ambitious Climate Pledges to Action. This webinar is co-organized with the LSE Middle East Center, and we are delighted to have with us today Dr. Michael Mason, the director of the LSE Middle East Center, who graciously supported the co-organization of this webinar and who will convene as a moderator later on in the second panel in today's webinar. In terms of the focus of today's webinar, as the title, we will look at the COP27 and the Middle East. And actually, instead of focusing on what will happen at the COP27, which will take place next month in Egypt, in Sharm el-Sheikh, between the 6th and the 18th of November, which is in less than 2 weeks from now, we would not focus on the key issues that will be negotiated in the COP. Rather, we would like to take the opportunity in this webinar to really look at what is happening in the ground. What are the key climate challenges that face the Middle East countries? And I really would like to call this COP, since it's taking place in Egypt, as a Middle East COP. So we like to take the opportunity to look at what is happening on the ground. What are the key climate challenges that face the Middle East countries? What are the implementation measures that have been undertaken so far? And what are the implementation gaps out there, as well as the solutions that could help fulfilling those gaps. And for that, I am very delighted to be joined today with esteemed speakers from different Middle East countries. We do have speakers from the UAE, from Bahrain, from Sudan, from Lebanon, as well as our colleagues from London. So thank you very much for your time and for your participation. I do also would like to take this opportunity to also thank the speakers who have contributed to the Insight series, the COP27 Insight series, which have been, so far we have published 4 papers, and they are available online on our website. So anyone who is watching us, I really invite you to go and read. They cover different aspects of climate issues concerning, for example, the water, the extreme weather events, even the impact of climate change on tourism, as well as the finance, and how the Middle East countries can tackle extreme weather events. So with that, and before I kick off the first panel for today, I want to just give a little bit of hint on the structure of today's panel. So our webinar, we do have 2 panels today, and we have 2 hours. So each panel will be covered in 1 hour, and we do have 3 speakers per panel. Each speaker will be given 6 to 8 minutes to give opening remarks. And after that, we will open the floor for the questions. So all of those who are joining us, if you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat box so we can take them from there. And if you know the name of the speaker that you are directing the question to, please feel free to put the name so we know to whom the question is posed. So with that, I'm happy to kick off the first panel for today, which is focusing on the adaptation of climate change in the Middle East. And we would look at the key climate challenges that face Middle East countries. We will look at the water and the food security challenges. We will look at the finance of the climate change, as well as the citizen involvement in addressing climate change. And for that, I do have 3 esteemed speakers, which I'm going to introduce shortly. First of all, we do have Dr. Nadeem Farajallah, who is the Director of the Climate Change and the Environment Program at the American University of Beirut Islam Faris Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs in Lebanon. Dr. Farajallah works in the private sector and focused on different issues concerning the water resources, the infrastructure, environmental impact studies and management plans, as well as hydrological studies, erosion and assessment and mitigation. Dr. Farajallah is the founder and head of the Land, Water and Environment Department at the consulting firm SET International, with projects in Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Iraq, Egypt, and Oman. Dr. Farajallah gained his PhD in environmental engineering from the University of Oklahoma. Secondly, I would like also to welcome Mustafa Bayoumi, who is a research fellow at the Energy, Climate Change and Sustainable Development at the Anwar Gargash Diplomatic Academy, or AGDA. Before joining AGDA, Mustafa worked as an associate researcher at Mohammed bin Rashid School Government, where he led sustainable development policy research. He holds a master's degree in sustainable development from Uppsala University from Sweden. His research interests include energy transition and adaptation to climate impacts in the MENA region. Last but not least, I would like also to welcome Dean Sharp, who is a visiting fellow in human geography and environment at the London School of Economics and Political Science. Dr. Dean was previously a postdoctoral fellow at the Aga Khan Program for Islamic Architecture at the MIT and the co-director of the Thierry Fohm Center for Advanced Urban Research. He is the co-editor of 2 books, including the Beyond the Square, Urbanism and the Arab Uprising, and the most recently published book, Open Gaza, published by the American University in Cairo, Press and Reform. Dr. Dean has published in top-ranked journals, including Progress in Human Geography and Urban Studies. With that, now I would give the floor to our speakers. We will start with Dr. Nadeem Farajallah to give his remarks, and then we will move to Mustafa, and then finally Nadeem. Sorry, Dean. So Nadeem, I give the floor to you.
Thank you, Aisha, for this and for the invitation. It's a privilege for me to be amongst such an esteemed panel of speakers. And it's very nice to see some familiar faces here. I would like to start by, I will not take too much time. I'll just start with giving my thoughts on a few things pertaining to the situation regarding climate change and its impacts on the region that we live in. Allow me to start by saying that I believe the term Middle East is a false construct, and we should, especially as when we speak regarding climate change and environmental issues, Middle East, all countries being lumped together and different parts of this region being lumped together is wrong. Let's start by the governance structures. They differ greatly from one country to another. There are some cultural differences that permeate, that give each country and each region its distinct characteristic. But most importantly, there are geographic differences that have relations to climatological dissimilarities. through our work here at the Issam Ferris Institute, and over the years that we've worked, we've managed sort of to align the region into 4 basic regions. We've got the Arabian Peninsula, which comprises of Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Yemen. They have mostly similar geographies, similar climatic conditions. Yemen and Oman are a little bit different and more closer to the Horn of Africa. The Levant or Mashriq, and by this definition, I just want to restrict it to Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and Palestine. They have their own physiography, geography, and the climatic conditions in most parts of this region are similar. And then you can go to the Maghreb, which is Libya, Algeria, Morocco, and Tunisia. The Nile is an entity in and of itself, and it is unique in this setting for several reasons. Within this construct, if you will, or within this distribution, I just want to point out some of the impacts that for me at least, are of most concern, and they have not really been addressed or we have not paid enough attention to. The Arabian Peninsula is suffering and will suffer from temperature increases that are going beyond livability at some point. IPCC AR6, the Assessment Report 6, estimates using the RCP 8.5 that 7 degrees Celsius increase of extreme temperature can be realized by 2100. And this makes life unlivable, basically. The current intensity and frequency of hot extremes are increasing, and we've seen this, and we've seen the dust storms that are becoming more frequent and more intense. And this is also coupled with the extreme events of precipitation that occur with cyclones coming on land, touching land, and creating different sorts of causing havoc and damage. The major problem for the Levant, for example, for me, is not particularly associated with temperature increase directly. Temperature increase is a major problem. But what is happening is the extent and the intensity of droughts, severe droughts. And this has had some cascading effects onto other aspects of life in this region. And I'll touch upon this in a second. The Maghreb, again, temperature increases and nearing 7 degrees Celsius is not unforeseen. And the heat waves over the southern Mediterranean are going to be increasing greatly. And this is similarly felt in the Nile countries. However, the Nile, the monkey wrench in all of this is that there is no conclusive study that or conversion of studies that indicate how the Nile is going to be affected by climate change. Some studies say the flow will increase, others say the flow will decrease. So this is roughly what we are looking at. And some of what we are looking forward to in COP27, and a whole list has been set up. We know we need to make sure that the financing mechanism for loss and damage is set and in place, and we need to scale up support for adaptation and make sure that the $100 billion a year is met and enforced and maybe added to. All of this is well and good, but still up in the air, and what's causing us more grief is the associated political security situation that's being experienced around the world with different ramifications or reflecting poorly on our region. Basically, this region, I prefer the term West Asia, North Africa, is not ready and not fully geared up to adaptation. We are not putting in enough money. We are not building up capacity. we are reverting to knee-jerk reactions and at times cosmetic projects that make us look good, but really do not give us the support that we need to face the future. Food security has been concern for food security has been on the rise recently because of the Ukraine crisis. And this reflects, for example, on Egypt. Egypt said they want to increase wheat production by 50% so that they can meet most of their local needs internally without having to import. That means that they will need to increase irrigated land. Where will that water come from? Okay, that's an issue, especially now with the GERD being completed and the tension between Ethiopia and Egypt over the Nile water. Where is this going to lead us? Why has this not been looked at before? We are always 2 generations late, if I want to be really nasty, but maybe a generation late, if I want to be generous. Iraq's water crisis right now, it is in part due to the drought that the region is experiencing. But more importantly, it's because adaptation measures have not been incorporated, not only in Iraq, but in Turkey and Iran, which control the headwaters of the Tigris and the Euphrates. And this is reflecting not only poorly on these 2 countries, but on Iraq and Syria as well. And we've seen movements of people and tensions rising because of this. I will finalize my remarks here with looking into my home country, Lebanon. We've known all along that our reliance on fossil fuel in a country like ours is not really to our benefit. It is we're renting out our independence to the oil companies. And lo and behold, we hit a financial crisis. The fuel cost is now beyond the means of many of the water establishments to pump water. So they cannot buy fuel to pump water, and people are ending up without water. There's a huge movement for solar power systems, but this move is not coordinated and to the benefit of the general public. It's just individuals that are getting the solar panels in, and this is increasing the divide between the haves and have-nots. In general, what's happening in our region, we are poorly reacting to to what's required of us for adaptation. We are not sinking in the money ahead of time. We are not looking at our national adaptation action plans properly, and we are late, very late. We're focusing on other things that we should not be doing that. So real financing is not here yet. I'll stop with this. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Nadeem, for that kind of a comprehensive overview of what's going on in terms of addressing different climate adaptation issues, including the water, the food, the geopolitical issues as well. So thank you for that. Now I will turn the speaker to my colleague Mustafa, who is going to cover the climate finance challenges and opportunities for the MENA region. Mustafa, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Perfect. So first of all, thank you very much, Aisha, for the invitation, and I'm very glad to be among an amazing group of speakers. It's an honor for me to be there. I'd like to echo many of the things that Dr. Nadeem has mentioned, because those are actually quite important. So the Middle East has been specifically pointed out as a climate change hotspot, which means that the region is going to be impacted basically at a higher sense compared to other regions. And it's not just the extreme heat or the droughts or the floods, but also there are others like sea level rise, and there's going to be prolonged impacts basically. And as Dr. Nadeem mentioned many of these points, I'll jump right into the main topic, which is finance, because adapting to those impacts is actually quite costly. And just to throw out some numbers to give a sense of how big this challenge is, and I'm sorry, Dr. Nadim, but I'm going to use even larger geographic areas, but that's where the data is available. So from an Arab country's perspective, there is a project under the UNFCCC that is called Needs-Based Climate Finance. And they try to quantify the finance needs for certain regions to tackle climate change. And what they found is that for Arab countries, their estimated finance requirements is somewhere around 450 billion US dollars by the year 2030. When you compare it to what is currently flowing to the region, that's somewhere around 6 billion. So their needs is around 450. Right now, they're getting around 6. So there's a huge gap there to be filled. And when you look even further into those 6 billion US dollars, most of them are actually going into mitigation rather than adaptation in the region. And in addition to that, whenever countries in the region try to access finance for adaptation, they find a very long process, quite complicated process in order to access those funds. And then we also have to focus on another thing. There's increasing debt in the region, which is also happening as well globally. To the extent that the chief economist of the World Bank said recently that basically the main challenges in front of the World Bank right now are debt and climate change. And that's actually interesting, because that's one of the things that I've been looking into. So how can we finance adaptation in the region without having to wait for finance to come from developed countries? Because as we know, there's $100 billion US pledge from developed to developing countries. This has not been met. They did not disperse this amount. And actually, quite a few countries are very unhappy with this situation, and they're starting to lose trust in the process, to the extent that the V20 group of countries, which is actually more than 50 countries, they are now considering not to pay off their debts until an agreement is reached on how they can get climate finance. So that said, and combining debt with climate, one of the tools that I mentioned is debt for climate swaps. And the idea behind this is that it's a financial instrument that reduces a developing country's debt in exchange for a commitment or investment in national climate adaptation or mitigation programs. And so what would happen in that case is a certain country would basically reduce another's debt. That could be actually a country, but it could be a multilateral development bank, depending on who owns that debt. And in return, they would reduce it, and the country would improve their action or increase their action on climate change. This could actually, it's a very promising tool. UNESCO is putting a lot of effort into finding ways to actually implement it in the region. But of course, there always comes challenges, because then the entities that own the debt, they want to have very close monitoring into what is going to be, the money is going to be spent on. Is it going to be spent on adaptation or mitigation? So of course, if it's a developed country, they would rather have it spent on mitigation. And so there's quite a few big question marks on this tool. However, it's a tool that can reduce the debt of many countries in the region. And from a recent IMF report, there's actually quite a handful of countries in the region that are at an alarming rate of debt. The other tool that we could also use in the region is green bonds or green sukuk. So basically, although those do not directly reduce countries' debt, but they are actually quite flexible tools, and so they have the ability to reduce shock crises. So, for example, such as what happened with the COVID-19 pandemic, what is happening now in geopolitically, the Ukraine-Russia war, and so it actually green bonds and green sukuk have proven to attract private capital, and this money could actually be then invested into climate-friendly projects. I noticed that I'm running out of time, so I'll actually stop here and hand it back to you, Aisha.
Okay, thank you very much, Mustafa. I do have 2 follow-up questions that I would like to ask later, so thank you very much. Now I would like to move to Dean Sharp to speak about bringing climate action home.
Thank you so much, Aisha, and thank you also Nadeem and Mustafa, because you've outlined so many important issues that I could also tie in. But the basis of what I want to talk to you about today is this problematic of, as Aisha was saying, bringing climate change home, of making this shift from this international, financial, diplomatic often engagement, and to bring climate conversations home to the levels of the school systems, the streets and cafes and workplaces of the region. And these comments come off a research report that I published for the Middle East Center at LSE called The Quiet Emergency: Experiences and Understandings of Climate Change in Kuwait. And before I dive into that, I did just want to pay homage to 2 giant intellectuals that we've actually lost recently. The one is Bruno Latour and the other Mike Davis, who really made profound contributions to the struggle to change our global system into something that is more ecologically sound. And I just wanted to kick off with a quote from Bruno Latour, actually, because it also gets to the heart of what this Kuwait project was all about. I mean, he said, "My interest is that there is a disconnect between the science and the size of the threat that people mention about nature, the planet, and the climate, and the emotion that this triggers. So we are supposed to be extremely frightened people, but despite that, we appear to sleep pretty well." And this actually was very much where the starting point for the research that I did around Kuwait started, because I was intrigued as to why in 2016, when Kuwait, for all intents and purposes, I think, recorded one of the highest temperatures on the planet, and it sparked a lot of Western media, English language articles that cited this temperature and the fact that Kuwait is getting to more unlivable climates. And Nadine commented on that already, so I won't go into it again. But within Kuwait itself, there was not that reaction. And, you know, so it was trying to think, well, how are Kuwaitis actually addressing these record-breaking temperatures? What is the discussion? Is it really simply just silence? And so one of the things that we did was to do an analysis of the 2020 parliamentary elections, and to look through media, you know, the electoral campaigns, posters, priorities, Instagram groups and conversations, you know, really get into this election to see the topics discussed. Out of the plus 300 candidates, 326, I think, you know, we found one candidate that even mentioned climate change. And that was even only in passing. And, you know, we followed up with parliamentary electoral candidates to, you know, get to grips with why it's just not at all on the agenda. And we got, I think, what would be the expected types of response, that there's a hierarchy of needs in Kuwait. There's a debt crisis, stuff that kind of went into that into a little bit. There's perceived real allegations and resentment around corruption, and societal tensions, racial, gender, and so on. And climate change simply just could not get a look in. And the candidates were very clear to us that raising climate change, even if they were wanting to do it as candidates, was clearly seen as either a Western issue or a luxury one, or just didn't resonate with the hierarchy of needs that Kuwaiti citizens, because of course only citizens can participate in the elections, and that is a minority of the population, can view it as important. And in terms of when we were trying to listen more intently as to why this issue, education and awareness often came up. But I do want to stress that Kuwaitis, both citizens and non-citizens, it's a very globally connected place. They are very well aware across the demographic profiles of climate change. It's an accepted phenomenon. People are very well aware. They may not be able to explain in detail around greenhouse gas emissions and so on, but there is, I can confidently say through the extensive research that we've done, a good awareness that the climate is changing in Kuwait and that it is due to climate change. But with this having said, again, through our extensive research, it is not a topic that gets discussed in workplaces, in schools, and is seen as a priority. So there is, and as the title of our report said, a quiet emergency. It is not discussed in local context. And it is in part the way that climate change is framed and engaged in the region, which is overly top-down. It isn't one that is in the opinion pages of local papers, that is discussed in places of worship, in schools and among colleagues. But again, going down and listening deeper and questioning people, there are great concerns of public health. People raised, the issues of increased asthma, of heat stroke, and epidemiological studies now are coming out by brilliant Kuwaiti researchers and doctors showing that heat is leaving migrant workers, more vulnerable to death by multiple factors. Dust storms are creating increased vulnerabilities. We're getting new forms of inequality as well that we have to be attentive to in terms of indoor and outdoor work, right? And even like this indoor and outdoor, and this is perhaps where the intellectual work needs to come in as well, is becoming more complex, because of course there are spaces inside that are away from air conditions and climate control that are also leaving those who are more vulnerable exposed to instances of death. And the work that needs to also be done for also adaptation and mitigation strategies to be properly grounded and adapted is to ensure that there is this locally grounded knowledge that is engaged with how people are adapting and mitigating, even in the absence perhaps of climate talk, to ensure that they are tailored to people's everyday lives. And there is that absence at the moment within the region of that research, and I hope our report and then the current research that we're building on that is contributing and will encourage more locally grounded municipal politics around climate urbanism and climate change in the region more broadly.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Dean. And I really also would like to ask some follow-up questions, but so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to ask a follow-up question for each one of you, and then we can go with the same order. So my question to Nadine is, so you mentioned very clearly that we are lagging behind in terms of adapting to climate change. And you've mentioned that there's the movement is going on now to prepare for the COP27. And this almost happens every year. All the governments and the countries put a lot of effort on, communicating their climate mitigation and adaptation ambitions in preparation for the COP. And I would like to really differentiate between the global governance of climate and the national governance of climate. And I would like to hear from you more, if you could tell us if this movement to prepare for the COP is translating in any way to addressing those issues presented at the COP into national climate action. My question maybe is that, are we walking the talk at all when it comes to climate action at home, either in any adaptation area or finance? And maybe you can reflect on Lebanon. And then the other question is, you mentioned the water scarcity issues in the Nile River and the drought that hits Iraq, and the issue with the Syria. So from a research that I've also done, there could be some geopolitical and a security challenge that emerged from the changes in the rainfall patterns and the drought. I wonder from your research if you could highlight more on the regional governance that tackles climate security in the region. If there are any governmental institutions that address the issue. Yeah, maybe, yeah, I have a third question, maybe we'll leave it for later. And then my question for Mustafa. Mustafa, you mentioned two tools, financial tools, the debt for climate swap and the green bonds. I wonder if these tools can be applied equally for the Middle East countries, or are they going to differ from one country context to another? And then the interesting point you mentioned that although climate adaptation is a more challenge for the region than the concern for the mitigation, but most of the finance is actually going for the mitigation. If you could give some reasons why is that happening? Why not the finance goes to the adaptation? So I'd appreciate that. And then finally, to you, Dean, it is really interesting that you mentioned that the people are well aware of the impacts of the climate change. And my question is, what would be like, especially for the youth, we both know kind of a pressure on the youth that because they will live longer and then they will experience the impact of the climate change more than anyone else. So, and you mentioned that the parliament doesn't pay enough attention to the issue of the climate change. So I wonder, like, what do you think the channels that are available out there that could be used to mobilize the interest and concerns of the youth to push for, putting climate agenda on the top of the governmental agenda? And I'll leave it there. So maybe we can start with Nadim and then Mustafa and then Nadim. Thank you.
Thank you, Aisha. Yeah, it is. Your questions are intriguing in many facets, if you will. I boiled it down to global versus local regional governments on climate issues. Again, here the region is divided into the oil producing and non-oil producing countries, and that reflects in the riches that they have and their ability to auto self-finance or to be sort of independent and plot their own path forward and react to that. A lot of the governments, Lebanon is one of them, in the middle of them, if not, are incapable of financing their own plans totally, especially now with the crisis that we are in. So a lot of the governance, Lebanon and most countries in the region have signed up to the Paris Agreement and its subsequent parts and articles, and everything is sort of set in place. But then the funding comes in for you to implement what you have put in. And as Mustafa said, the money is coming in, and you indicated the money coming in is mostly for mitigation. And mitigate really what? I mean, we are bearing the brunt in this region, and we're not producing as much CO2 or carbon into the atmosphere as other countries, and we really need to start preparing our adaptation. So the governance is more geared, you have everything in place for some kind of an adaptation, but a major chunk, if you look at the NDCs of many countries here, they are all for mitigation efforts. So this is something that needs to be rectified. So there is a globally driven agenda for this, in that it is reflected incorrectly in our part of the world. And there are the mechanisms are there. Dean, I really liked what you said about, people are aware that climate is changing. They cannot point their finger at it totally. What is the real cause? It differs, but people know that the climate is changing, and it's due to human activities. I'm using this to move into your second question. In a study, and this is not reflected, as Dean said, in candidates going to parliament and talking about the climate. Several successive governments in Lebanon have addressed climate in their in their accession statement. When the government gets voted into parliament, they put their sort of manifesto. I hate that word, but that's the only thing I can think of now. They put their manifesto, and climate is right there. But how much do people or parliament act on it? Not much. So in a study we were doing on the impact of droughts on security and mobility of people, and this is climate-driven, basically climate change as a basic driver for drought. People would note, and we did this in Lebanon and in Jordan. So the two separate communities in these two countries, those that we identified as most likely to be impacted by climate change and drought, people in there identified water scarcity not as a result of climate change. They said it's as a result of mismanagement of people, of the government. And then there comes up an issue that keeps rising, the displaced people coming into both countries. They are useful, they are seen as useful additions to the workforce to some extent, and then they become competitors for resources at another. So tensions start rising. And what people, what governments, the way they approach it, it is not that it is climate-driven security issue that needs to be addressed. No, it's highly political. For example, in Lebanon, the country is divided between those that want the Syrians to stay until it's totally safe in Syria, and those that want to send Syria back and the Syrians back, and irrespective. And the driver, especially most recently with the cholera outbreak that we have experienced in northern Lebanon, it is really the epidemic that we're getting is from Syrians in North Lebanon moving down North Syria, migrating to North Lebanon and going back and forth across the border, bringing the bacteria with them and infecting others. And this is what people don't see that the climate is reducing flows and forcing people to use contaminated water to irrigate, and people are getting sick from that. That's an issue. People don't see it that way. They see it as movement across the border, and we need to stop it. So the climate security link is still nascent, and it's still seen from the, if you want to say it, the military point of view, as security, police, army, etc., not as a socioeconomic structure that needs to be built up so that, that there is no reason for people to take up arms and lead to extremism. Sorry for taking too long.
No worries. Thank you very much. Mustafa, would you like to reply to the question?
Yeah, sure. So regarding your first question on how can the tools be used, or can they be used by different countries? So in essence, any country can use any of the tools. But realistically speaking, the least developed countries or fragile economies are going to find it very hard to use green bonds, for example, to attract external investors, right? So it is very hard for them to do that. On the other hand, low income and middle income countries could actually make the case to get some of their debt relieved. It's much harder for high income countries to do that. So I mostly recommend the debt for climate swaps for low and middle income countries, and for regarding the green bonds and green sukuk for high income countries. And that's actually what we're seeing. That is what's happening right now. So you'll see that the UAE, and sometimes also middle income countries like Egypt, those are the type of countries that are attracting the green bonds. Regarding your second question, which was on why is finance flowing to mitigation rather than adaptation? So this is actually a question that I can talk about for hours, but I'll try to be very brief and give some, like just a few of the very big reasons. The first one, if we're talking about finance through the GCF, for example, Green Climate Fund and others similar to that, it's mostly because this money comes from the developed countries, and that's where they see the money should be spent. This is starting to change, though. At least we're getting a sense that there might be a different discussion during the next COP. On the other hand, when we talk about private investments, for example, or investment through other banks, multilateral development banks, and so on, the money is going to mitigation because mitigation could actually be profitable. So it is profitable, and there is a return on investment when you invest the money in a renewable energy power plant, for example, right? Or a renewable energy plant. But it's not very profitable to invest it in climate proofing a bridge. There's no return, or there might not be a direct return from that. One very important thing, that's something that I actually worked on before moving to the UAE. I used to look at why is finance not flowing to water projects and the different types of. One of the things that we kept hearing is that that's development, that's not climate. Okay, but that's like quite a big issue, because we still cannot, like, for some organizations, they have a line, they drew a line on differentiating what is climate and what is development. And that's quite a big question mark, because when you speak about water projects, a lot of people would argue that this could be both. So how do you differentiate whether it's going to be one or the other? And I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Mustafa. Now I hand it over to Dean.
Great, thanks, Aisha. Yeah, it's a really important question and part of our report focuses on the clear generational divide that exists with youth really taking up this issue. And clearly, this is also, I'm very attentive to the way in which our respondents were framing climate change as a Western and luxury issue. And in the sense, you do see the fact that, the youth are clearly influenced by Western celebrities, social media, Instagram, right, in their concern for climate change, and they're taking it. I'm not framing that necessarily as a positive or negative thing. It's just, this was the data from the focus groups and interviews that we were doing. And they were the single parliamentary candidate that did respond around climate change was to a youth at an Instagram forum pushing this issue. So there are those kind of routes into parliamentary debates and so on through. And when we talk to parliamentary candidates, again, it was their concern over the environment. Often their children were mentioned and referenced as to why they should take this issue more seriously. But the second point I just wanted to emphasize, in terms of, which goes back to my original point of like bringing climate change home and trying to make it more a part of the actual fabric, because it is no suitable to get climate policy and interest just from Twitter and Leonardo DiCaprio, right? We want a grounded, responsive, locally contextualized and intellectually substantiated climate knowledge in the region that also these youth are engaged with, and that is the ambition, and that I hope is where the conversation can go. I won't go into it, but clearly at the moment there are quite deliberate blockades being placed that are societal, political, and intellectual that exist within the region to stop that from happening.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Dean. We do have a question in the chat box. I'll direct it to all speakers. The chat box. Yes, so it is a question from Jihad Al-Busaidi. Hi, Jihad. Jihad saying Oman has declared 2050 as a year for net zero. Congratulations. And then her question is, can carbon credits work efficiently for Oman's situation, and could it contribute to climate action? So I direct this question to everyone, but I also have another question, and I'm cautious of time. I think we will conclude with those questions. My question is to the all speakers as well. So since two Middle East countries are hosting the COP this year and next year, Egypt and the UAE hosting COP27 and COP28, are you hopeful that these COPs will be a changing point for the Middle East when it comes to climate action at the national level? Maybe we can go the same round, Nadeem, and then Mustafa, and then Dean.
Yeah, great. Good for Oman. 2050 net zero will be fantastic. But I am one of those people that hate this issue about carbon credit. It is, it's not right. You do what you have to do for your own country, and this allows the polluters to keep on polluting ad nauseum. Whatever formulation they come up with is something that I really do not appreciate. I would like each country, each emitter to be responsible for their own emissions and not take credit for something that somebody else is doing. That's what I want to start with for the carbon credit system. This doesn't help locally in a way. For Middle East hosting COP, I hate to sound very negative. I'm not. I'm always optimistic at my core. But we've had two COPs from the Middle East. We've had the Doha COP and the Marrakesh COP. Nothing much happened here. And I don't see much happening in the next two COPs because they are being held here. There might be something. There might be somebody in power might have an epiphany, and then they'll start thinking, yes, we need to act. more positively and strongly on climate action. But for now, I don't see much happening other than, yes, we did a good COP, good for us, pat us on the back, and then we'll move on to the next one. That's mostly what's going to happen, I'm afraid. Thanks. Over to Mustafa or you.
Thank you, Nadeem. Mustafa?
Yeah, so on the carbon credits part, so what the science tells us is that we have a very, very narrow chance now of achieving the 1.5 unless major climate action has taken place. So I do share Dr. Nadeem's reservations, but I do imagine that if we actually want to achieve any of this, we will need to use all the tools at our disposals, although some of them I'm not a big fan of, like negative emission technologies and so on. But I mean, it seems that there is no other way, right? And from the IPCC reports, we now know how bad it could get if we reach the 2 degrees Celsius. So we really need to push for 1.5 with all the tools that we can have. On whether the region is going to capitalize on hosting 2 COPs back to back. So it's true from previous experience that they didn't, but I think this time it's a bit different because climate has gone really high up on the agenda in general. It's becoming a very important topic for all countries. And we're also noticing, at least I'm noticing a lot of action in Egypt right now as they prepare to host the COP. We're noticing a lot of action in the UAE as well. So I think, yes, they will capitalize. My hope is that they keep building on this momentum. So not just put a lot of effort for a year or two while COP is there and then the effort fades away. There needs to be capacity building. There needs to be awareness campaigns so that people actually take note of COP, take note of climate action, what needs to be done. And so they don't just put effort for 1 or 2 years and then it's done. No, we need to build on this momentum. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mustafa. Dean?
As I'm the final commentator, and although we do not live in optimistic times, I am gonna be a bit optimistic. I'm gonna struggle to be, but I am going to be. And the 2 optimistic points I will say is that although we live in very uncertain, if not directly violent times, there is a seismic geopolitical and economic change going on. And within that change, there are opportunities, very clear opportunities for human society, for Arab society to adapt and mitigate the way in which our energy systems and our economic systems are run. We are in a new phase of globalization. I wouldn't call it deglobalization, but we are going to have a very different type of economic system and social system going forward. So there is an opportunity there. And the second point is to say that I do think it's a good thing that COP is being held in Egypt and the UAE, and that the climate conversation is, I think, growing. The youth are engaged on this issue. They want to be engaged in this issue. They care about it. And I think even the older generation, although there is strong pushback still, there is recognition in the Gulf countries, I think, about a Norway model, and I hope they have bigger ambitions than that. But within the region more broadly, there is just a strong realization that the climate is changing, and that climate change is something that is immediate and needs to be addressed.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dean. And yes, we finished on time. It is now 5 o'clock our time. I really would like to say very much thank you to all speakers, Nadeem, Mustafa, and Dean, Thank you very much for your time and for your insights today. We really appreciate it. And now I would like to hand over to Dr. Michael Mason to convene the second panel for today. Michael, it's over to you.
Thank you, Aisha. Thank you for finishing on time, exactly on time. And I'll start by saying how much I really enjoyed that panel. My name is Michael Mason. I'm the Director of the Middle East Centre at the London School of Economics and Political Science. Thanks to NUS, to Aisha, to Michelle, and all their colleagues for inviting us to be part of this event, which is a very, very timely and important. This second panel will follow the same format as the first in terms of the presenters and then question discussion. It's titled COP27 Beyond, Will the GCC Leave Hydrocarbons Behind? That's the Gulf Cooperation Council. And the focus is on this particular grouping of fossil fuel producers, the GCC, as having particular climate change challenges, both in terms of mitigation, but also from the traditional economic model that they have, which is the sort of high sort of dependence, particularly on export revenues from the extraction, use and sale of fossil fuels, where that also gives them particular opportunities. And just to say very briefly that to follow up on Dean's points, there is this question about the type of economic transition we're looking at into a possibly, hopefully, a net zero world. And a couple of years ago, when Saudi Arabia had the presidency of the G20 group of nations, it promoted the idea of a circular carbon economy, that somehow you might be able to decouple or de-link the fossil fuel production and anthropogenic global greenhouse gas emissions. This is a very, very live debate about whether this is indeed possible, and perhaps we will cover this in terms of this panel. We have three distinguished speakers in the panel. I shall now introduce them in turn. I thank you to the speakers for their time, the presenters. They'll have about 5 to 6 minutes each. The speakers, please forgive me if I condense your biographies, because there are extensive biographies with all your many achievements, but I'll probably condense in terms of the needs of time. So we'll go in the three speakers in turn. And again, welcome very much to this panel. First presenter will be Professor Walid Khalil Al-Zubari. He's Professor of Water Resources and Coordinator of the Water Resources Management Program at the College of Graduate Studies and also the UN Water and Learning Center for the Arab region, hosted at the Arabian Gulf University in Bahrain. He serves also as a member of the Permanent Advisory Committee for the Water Resources Council in the Kingdom of Bahrain. He has extensive experience and academic expertise across sort of water resources management and water energy food nexus. He's published over 100 research papers in peer-reviewed journals, attended multiple academic conferences, and Professor Walid's expertise in water resources governance, planning and management, and particularly the management also of groundwater systems, is internationally recognized, and look very much forward to what he's saying in terms of the panel sort of focus. I should also say, also he serves as editor-in-chief of the Regional Arab Gulf Journal of Scientific Research, and he currently serves as the vice president of the GCC Water Science and Technology Association and chairman of its scientific committee, which is relevant to the focus of the panel. Our next presenter, Mr. Tanzid Alam, is managing director and founder of excellent company, Earth Matters Consulting. It's a firm that he established in 2017 to address the climate crisis and human development challenges. In that firm, he leads a team of experts to provide strategy and policy advisory services on climate change and sustainability for businesses, governments, and non-profits. EMC has clients across the Middle East, Europe, and Asia. Its clients include both governments, notice work for the UK government, development agencies, GIZ, the German Development Agency, also for major NGOs, Worldwide Fund for Nature, also work provided services for NEOM and the Red Sea Development Company, and also advised real estate developers and sovereign wealth funds in the region on their climate change efforts. And this is a sort of contribution, I think, which is essential as we go forward in terms of the expertise across different types of entities, states, corporations, and civil society. So welcome, Tanzid. And our last presenter, Dr. Sued Al-Manji. Dr. Sued is head of the Risk Management Department at the Ministry of Education in Oman. She holds a PhD in geography, a fellow geographer. Welcome, I'm a geographer, in disaster management and community resilience from the UK, from the University of Leeds. She's published papers in disaster management. Also notice with interest, Dr. Sued, she has an interest in the gender-related issues of disaster management, having recently published on the role of Omani women in disaster management in Oman. I haven't yet talked about that in terms of the discussion today about if there are particular gender-based considerations that we need to take into account in terms of climate change, adaptation, mitigation, and the transition to a low or zero hydrocarbons future. So with that in mind, again, and looking at the clock, we're going to ask each of the panelists in turn, if possible, to speak for about 5 to 6 minutes to provide some perhaps key themes on the topic of the panel, and then we'll go to the questions. If you want to ask questions and you're online, you can send them to me in the chat box, and I'll try and make time, as much time as possible in the second part of the panel to communicate those questions. So firstly, over to you, Professor Walid, welcome.
Thank you. Let me at the outset, reiterate my thanks to the organizers for their kind invitation and for providing me with the opportunity to, voice some points of view regarding what will happen and, in terms of the climate politics and so on. Honestly, I can't answer your question, will the GCC leave hydrocarbon behind? This is this is not an easy answer, but what I can do is I can present one of the sectors, because climate change is related to a number of sectors: industry, transportation, and water and energy, and so on and I'll try to give a brief on the challenges faced by the water sector, and then look at the interface between that sector and the climate change agenda and what's needed to be done. I'll try to get some opportunities to do something about mitigation as well as adaptation in that sense. As a researcher, my job is to really provide policymakers with practical solutions to fulfill their needs, and that's what I'm going to be trying to do, or just give them an advice of where to go. If I'm going to go very quickly if you look at the water scene in the GCC, you'll find that there are so many problems what we can and challenges, but we can really summarize them in shortly. That there is an increasing scarcity with time due to the rapid population growth, due to the accelerated socio-economic development that we are experiencing now, which is unprecedented in any time in this region. And we are having an increase in our water demands and as well as electricity demands, and we have to rely on non-conventional water resources like desalination to really provide this. With this reliance, we have to, desalination. You will have to burn more fossil fuel. You have to, have a lot of externalities coming on the side in terms of greenhouse gases emissions, as well as polluting or impacting the coastal and marine environment. And that's, we do have problems like, the groundwater resources depletion. We are having wastewater, inadequate reuse of our wastewater. But really, if you look at the interface between the climate agenda or action and the water sector, you'll find that the crux of the matter is really desalination. It is in the middle of that. That's the interface that we have to really, focus on. And because of the time, we can't go this way or that way. Just let's focus on that. As you know, all the GCC are signatories of the Paris Agreement, and they have already committed their indices and lowering, and they have already submitted their, national determined contributions to lower their emissions. And just before COP26, they have 1 week before that, they have also announced the carbon neutrality by the year 2050 for 60 for Bahrain, 50 for UAE, 60 for Saudi Arabia. But if I'm going to go and see how can we achieve these, indices or targets or contribute to the international agenda by reducing our greenhouse gases emission, we have two ways. We have to go on water adaptation itself, the climate change adaptation in the water sector, and with that you will find that there are some adaptation with mitigation co-benefits. So if I would adapt, I will have to reduce my losses. I have to reduce per capita water consumption. I have to reduce my leakages. I have to reduce a lot of things that I have to trim off the inefficiencies. And by trimming that inefficiencies, because I rely 100% on desalination, I will be also reducing the production of desalinated water, which means reduction of the greenhouse gas emissions, per country. That is one thing. The other thing is that with desalination, I mean, it's clear that we and desalination are going to be friends for a long time. We are not going to have another source other than desalination to really fulfill the needs of our population in terms of drinking water supply. So this SDG 1, SDG 6.1 will not be fulfilled by other means other than desalination. And this means that we have to focus on that desalination and see where are the problems. The problem with desalination that we are using fossil fuel to burn, and then we are having a lot of greenhouse gas emission, and we are having the externalities on the marine environment. So if logically, I would have to replace or decouple desalination from fossil fuel through nuclear, through renewable, through hydrogen, whatever the energy source would be, but not fossil fuels. So we do have less greenhouse gas emissions. And we have to work also on mitigating the externalities on our coastal and marine environment, and that can be done through circular economy, which you just indicated, that has been said by Saudi Arabia or presented by Saudi Arabia in the G20, that a circular economy to utilize all this brine that's coming out, the hot and rich in minerals brine, to be commercialized or to be used in a way or another instead of dumping it to the sea. That's my take on within this short period of time on how can we move to a lesser hydrocarbon climate. And thank you.
You're muted, maybe, Michael.
Apologies, I sometimes do that. Yes, thank you, Professor Walid. Yes, I think there's also that opens up all sorts of wonderful areas for discussion, which we might come on to hopefully in questions. Tanzid, over to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Michael, and thank you, Professor Walid. I'm assuming you can all hear me clearly. It's a really interesting topic that you mentioned today, you know, and is the GCC going to leave hydrocarbons behind? To be very honest, I don't think so. Just to be blunt about that, because I've been in the region now for kind of 14, almost 15 years, and it has shown a tremendous capacity for change in terms of embracing the climate change agenda, with kind of it being recognized as increasingly a major issue at the top of kind of governments. And it's and the way in which these countries operate is very much top down. You know, the leadership kind of sets the vision and the strategy, and they think long term, and then others have to essentially fall into place. So that has many advantages in terms of thinking about climate change and addressing it in the long term and the consistency. However, you know, if you look at it practically, I don't know those who live in Dubai, or I'm sure it's similar in other parts of the region. The large car culture is something that has existed and continues to exist. You know, fuel inefficient cars on the roads, petrol's pretty cheap, although now with rising oil prices, it's increased more. It's probably more than it's ever been in the time I've been here. But still, you can buy the petrol and burn it, and there's like kind of an imperative for some of the national oil companies to actually get an income from their own markets. So there's a lock-in, I think, into that resource, and it's going to be locked in for quite some time, the dependence on that. And to a certain extent, I think it's going to continue, because they've relied on this to develop the countries in the region. And, you know, if they before they even discovered oil and gas, it was, you know, if you look at a country like the UAE, it was quite poor kind of. In Abu Dhabi, it was essentially a fishing village. Dubai had more trade going through it, but still the revenues from oil and gas, you know, which kind of, you know, international oil companies and help to facilitate the extraction of that, has really helped the countries to invest in its future and its well-being for its residents. That means people have got jobs, you know, and then so a transition away from oil and gas, yes, it's crucial, and they're recognizing they can't just rely on oil and gas as a source of income, will require people's jobs and mindsets to change as well. So that kind of just transition from an oil and gas sector perspective in this region is something that hasn't been properly thought through before. Like, how do you train someone who's a career kind of oil and gas engineer to embrace something different, you know, renewable energy potentially, or, you know, is it looking more at things like carbon capture and storage, because the geological expertise that you need, engineering skills, is more transferable. So some of those things I haven't seen been fully kind of grappled with, because I think that's important. So people are given respect for the jobs that they've done to help develop the countries, but also recognizing there's a new shift in direction towards a net zero future, which will require a fundamental change in how the country's economies are structured. What we're seeing as well is that the like national oil companies like Saudi Aramco and ADNOC, for example, are now beginning to market their oil as being lowest carbon per barrel of oil in terms of the intensity of the extraction of the oil to the point of export, where they're saying anything that a country, if it imports their oil, it's their problem how they use it. They burn it in their cars inefficiently. That's part of their emissions inventory. But Saudi Arabia and the UAE, for example, they're trying to market their oil as something that's a low carbon or a green barrel of oil, if, you know, whether you debate that term or not, where whether it can really be green or not. So that's an area they're going more into. So ADNOC, for example, has gone more, used nuclear to, has connected its facilities to the grid with low carbon nuclear electricity. It's, you know, reducing gas flaring. It's beginning to also use carbon capture and storage. So that's part of its kind of program to say that, yes, the rest of the world can rely on our oil because it's slightly lower carbon than, say, tar sands in Canada. And that, I think, is quite an interesting competitive niche that they're trying to draw out for themselves. So whether you agree with it or not, I think that's an ideological kind of an aspect. But if, you know, from an equity and justice perspective, if you are to say that countries like the US and Europe In Canada, for example, they should reduce their exports of oil and gas potentially, and then maybe the rest of the world should rely more on the oil and gas from this region, from the GCC. So they're beginning to position themselves in that way as kind of the last people standing. Now, I haven't actually talked at all about the paper that we've had published recently with kindly through Aisha's team and so on. But obviously on the other side as well, the countries in the GCC face pretty profound impacts and risks from climate change. All the classic areas that have already been mentioned, like rising temperatures, increased flood risk. I mean, just to give you facts on that one, with flood risk in particular in Jeddah in the 2009 and 2011 floods, it was estimated to have caused between $3 and $5 billion of damages, and were registered as the worst floods in 30 years. In Oman, Cyclone Gonu in 2007, it was estimated to about 27% of the capital city, Muscat, was without power, and 90% of all roads were affected, and 49 people were confirmed dead. So that's pretty profound impacts that we're seeing, and the science shows that it's going to get only more intense in line with the rest of the world. So we've been looking at some of these sorts of issues before as Earth Matters. It is something, where it's a concern to see that there is a lack of focus, I'd say, and prioritization of the vulnerability and adaptation aspects of climate change here. You could argue that, yes, the GCC countries have the resources to invest, but what we've seen is that there's a lack of capabilities across different government departments to grasp what climate change means, looking at models and risk analysis, for example, and to try and prioritize what they should adapt to. There's plenty of opportunities around that. The cost benefits of investing in adaptation versus the benefits it provides is huge. Like the Global Commission on Adaptation have shown how much your benefit to cost ratio could be like 9 to 1, for different types of investments in adaptation measures. But it's not being translated yet into prioritizing climate change on their kind of national agendas yet, or at least adaptation, I'm talking about. So I'll stop there. I won't go into our recommendations yet from our paper, but I wanted to just frame it for you in that way, but I'm happy to dive into things a bit more.
Thank you very much, Tanzeen. And again, opening up lots of possible questions there and issues around the notion of what would be a just transition for the GCC economies and societies. So now we move on to Dr. Suad. Welcome.
Hello, good afternoon. Talking about climate change and the impact of climate change in the society, maybe I will focus on this area. As we noticed in the last few years that the tropical storms and flood was the main disaster related to climate in Oman, and based on the records, we note in Oman that the tropical storms with high intensity also increased in Oman, and the landfall of these tropical storms was in a high populated areas in the north and in South Oman. The country usually when any tropical storm facing lots of risks, financial risk, risks related to the people. People are losing their houses, building infrastructure, and all this was linked to the climate change, the increase in the intensity. Even the IPCC report, the last IPCC report, mentioned that if in the last 40 years, The IPCC mentioned that the temperature, if there is a probability that the intensity, the probability of high intensity tropical storms will increase by about 23% in the next few years. Maybe by 2050, we will have more tropical storms with degrees 4 and 5. And this will cause impacts, high impacts in our community, our infrastructure, and our financial resources as well. The carbon emission has a big relation with this intensity of tropical storms. It affects the, we have something in the tropical storm, we call it the wind shear, the vertical wind shear. There is a relation between the high emission and the vertical wind shear, and this is one of the reasons that the people are the researcher or the scientists in this area are discussing, and how can we reduce the emissions so we can control all these risks in related to climate and meteorological issues. In Oman, recently they announced by a decree of the Sultan for the net zero carbon by 2050. And they have different plans for this to achieve this goal by 2050, by like the transition to the green power, the sustainable power, like hydrogen and wind and power in Oman. Also, what I think is that it is important for the other institution, maybe they need to start what we call it climate proving for development, like in power sector or in water sector. They need to do like a risk assessment for what could happen if this happen in if the climate change increase or the emission increase. How could this affect our infrastructure or our development in Oman? This is what I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Suad. Yes, and I think the we can't separate the sort of obviously the climate change impacts from the means and vision by which we transition to a low carbon sort of future, because we'll be dealing with those impacts during that transition. So I think that's really important to highlight that we have to take that into account. We will follow the same format as the previous panel. Perhaps maybe I could start off maybe with questions for the panelists, and then we'll open up. I've got one question at the moment. So if anybody else wants to ask any questions who are attending, please communicate that to me. I think in terms of the panel focus, there's a major challenge that we've got. It's a major economic, geopolitical challenge that will set the pathway for the future for the peoples of the planet, which is what will we do with fossil fuels? And the couple of last week, the European Parliament endorsed something called the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, which basically argues for the rapid phasing down of fossil fuels. We know that the GCC countries, according to the most recent energy report from BP, that GCC countries hold about a half of the proven oil reserves in the world and 40% of the proven natural gas reserves. So the question then becomes, how do we deal with this transition? And the key question, which Tanzid and Professor Waleed sort of highlighted, is it possible to move forward under this sort of circular carbon economy, where you can continue producing fossil fuels? It's clearly within the vision of the GCC states, those that are producing fossil fuels for export, that they wish to continue and they plan to continue producing fossil fuels. And this is the big challenge. Is that possible? Is it possible to produce so-called green fossil fuels and decouple or somehow take away the sort of greenhouse gas emissions, or say it's responsibility of the end user? And there's another concept out there in the debate at the moment, the idea of fugitive emissions, that the circular carbon economy can phase out so-called fugitive emissions, which is anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions. So somehow you're capturing or reusing the carbon. So it's a big question. I'm sure we can't deal with it in half an hour. But if I just start off with a couple of questions for our panelists. Thank you very much for your contributions. Professor Waleed, I was very interested in your discussion about water adaptation to climate change in terms of what we do with water and some of the ways in which there might be some mitigation co-benefits from that. And I wonder if you could say a little bit more about that in terms of, particularly, I know you work on the water, energy, food nexus around, for example, food security for the GCC states. How is this achieved in this transition? Tanzid, as I said, I very much like the idea of thinking about this in terms of a just transition and what that means. And I took note particularly of the expertise that you said there is in the region, the geological sort of economic expertise, which might enable that scaling up of carbon capture, utilization and storage, which many across the world, many activists, particularly to society people, some countries are quite skeptical of. And I think that opportunity might not just be for the GCC countries, there could be a global opportunity there in terms of that expertise. So I wonder if you could just say a little bit, please, about what you see as, I know it's a big question, in terms of carbon capture, utilization and storage. Do you think this is something that will be a game changer? Because many out there are skeptical, but particularly in the Gulf states, there is an expectation that it will scale up. We will see the scaling up of CCUS at the necessary level to try to sort of achieve this circular carbon economy. And Dr. Suad, I was very interested in sort of comments about having to do with these impacts of climate change in terms of resilience, community resilience. And I think it'd be very interesting if you can perhaps say a little bit. I know because this paper was published in Arabic, your recent paper on the role of Omani women in disaster management and resilience in Oman and beyond, and what lessons that might have in terms of I know this sort of the UN speak would be gender mainstreaming, of course, of climate change, sort of adaptation resilience. But if you could say something about how you see the role of women as having a more prominent role, perhaps, in terms of some of the planning around this transition. Okay, so those are my three questions. We'll go in the same order. So Professor Waleed first. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. You have actually posed two questions. One is the adaptation with the mitigation co-benefits, and the other one is the food and the water, nexus, that we also have the energy actually part of that. But let me start by saying that for the first question, I was invited to talk during Cairo Water Week 2021 on a very interesting session called Watering the NDCs in the Arab region. Watering the NDCs in the Arab region, which is identifying where can the water sector help in fulfilling the commitments of the NDCs of the Arab countries. And if you go to countries like, in the Mashriq or Maghreb or even Egypt, you have to squeeze, the water here and there so you can, see the relationship. But and the GCC is very clear. Most of the water you are using is produced by, energy intensive desalination, which is using fossil fuel. And if you look at the consumption, pattern and the efficiencies of water consumption and the efficiency of water supply and the distribution network, you will find there is a huge potential for reduction. If you are talking about 500 liters per capita per day and 700 liter per capita per day and sometimes 1,000 liter per capita per day, that's a huge amount of losses that you are having, and this is not an efficient thing. So that's one part. The other thing, if you look at the distribution network and you find that you are having something like 30% losses of the water before it went to the consumer, that's also a huge potential for savings. So if you can work on the per capita water consumption and make it reasonable, and if you look at the benchmarking of the leakage, allowed leakage, and the best practice, you'll find there is a huge potential for reducing that. And if you can do that, and actually the cost of that's not that much. If you want to reduce it, you will save a lot of things. Among them, the greenhouse gas emission and the production that you do. So that's one side that the GCC have to work on. Looking at the demand management and the efficiencies in the supply. This is very important aspect that we have to look at. The other issue is that the food, the energy, food, water nexus, which is something like a little bit complicated issue, but let me just explain to you that the GCC don't rely on their own food production. They have that represent only 10% of their at best it is 10% of their food needs. The rest is being imported from outside, and also some foreign agricultural investment that you go to a country and you buy the land, or the country gives you the land, like Sudan provides the GCC countries with a piece of land and say, okay, this is your land, use it, invest in it. It's a very low rent or free of charge, and then you use it as a way of an Arabic integration, policy, as well as an investment, for the Sudanese people to have jobs and so on and so on. So the problem is that if the system is going nicely and linear, like it used to be before, COVID, before the Russian-Ukraine war, there was a conviction that yes, this is going to be the situation. But when COVID started happening, when the Russian-Ukraine war and the supply chains and the food supply chains started to be disrupted, again, we went back again. Wait a minute. I think we should start growing our own food too, and we have to increase our percentages of that to be secure. Now, I don't mind that. I don't mind that, but I mind practicing the traditional primitive irrigation or agricultural systems that's being done now, and we have to shift our agricultural sector to an industrial, sector by using modern agricultural system instead of these primitive ones that we are doing. Here, you really can make a lot of saving of water, as well as you can increase your production maybe 10 times. So there is no way the GCC countries can provide their own food. They are living in the desert. This is if God was wanted to have those countries to be agricultural, would have provided with a river or with a fertile land, but it doesn't. We are in the middle of the desert, and we have to make everything artificial. And to make it artificial, we cannot continue the traditional agricultural systems. We have to move to the
Thank you, Professor Waleed, and I thank you also for reminding us also that there's sometimes been an assumption, at least in European sort of discussions, that somehow the world is peaceful and the transition to a sort of low carbon, zero emissions future exists in a world which has an ordered, peaceful community. And one thing the Ukraine-Russian war has shown us that we have, and these can be incredibly disruptive of global supply chains, these types of events. So thank you for reminding us about that. Tanzid.
Sure, great. No, thank you. Actually, just I wanted to pick up on that last point you mentioned, Michael. I've been seeing in the news, kind of various European leaders coming to the region cap in hand, trying to get some kind of guarantees that oil and gas will still be supplied from this region, given the crisis in Ukraine, and so that kind of, again, it's on one side, when the COP circus arrives, kind of people calling for the region to leave their oil and gas in the ground. And at the same time, the politicians are coming here and asking, oh, please keep the taps on here because we really need it. So there's a complete kind of disconnect, and that needs to be, I think, addressed quite head on. What are the priorities? How do we actually support the countries in this region to ensure they can remain a reliable supplier of oil and gas? If that's the way they want to go, what does that mean in terms of countries like the US and Canada, for example, kind of not actually exporting and drawing down their oil and gas industry there? So there's some pretty big questions on equity, I think, and just transition that's hasn't really been unpackaged here. And whether the COP will present an opportunity for that or not, I really don't know, to be honest. There are these kind of oil and gas climate initiative, the oil and gas climate initiative that was established, which includes some of the major oil and gas companies who I don't know if they're addressing these sorts of topics, basically. I mean, I don't want to, ring the bell of the oil and gas industry by any means. Yeah, I've been working on climate change for a long time, so I'm very passionate about the topic and wanting to see a proper solution to it. When it comes to your question about kind of jobs and expertise, I'd say definitely that kind of ability around and kind of innovation on carbon capture and utilization and storage, and whether the CO2 can remain underground and monitoring and tracking that, identifying the right sites, is probably something that this region could really kind of get a niche and a head in as well. Now, it all goes down to carbon accounting, because I know that, for example, the way ADNOC has been doing it in the UAE is that they're justifying the economics of it by saying that we're enhancing the recovery of oil as a result of injecting CO2 underground. But if it's truly circular, if that oil is then used and burnt, it's not circular. Yeah, so you're it still needs to be accounted for as part of the overall life cycle carbon emissions to claim whether it's a circular carbon economy, so to speak. Because economies are also based on exports and imports and trade. So you can't just say we stop at the export points, but kind of thinking about what, if China's importing that green barrel of oil and using it in their vehicles, that has to be accounted for as part of a system accounting of carbon. The other interesting area that I'm kind of, I'm a bit of a kind of nerd and I like reading about this stuff. In Oman, there's been some interesting research done about peridotite rocks in the Hajar Mountains. This is really interesting. These rocks have basically been proven over time to absorb CO2, and it's getting investment in this. There's been researchers kind of looking at this, and there's a school of thought around whether if you can saturate seawater with CO2 and then pump the seawater underground into these rocks, it could be a major store of CO2 emissions. So there's other ways of storing CO2 that the geology and the natural kind of environment of this region could lend itself quite well to. So kind of this area around innovation, looking at what resources they have, could extend to that. And if you think about it, if there's a good, strong global price on carbon, and Oman could be a potential host for stores of carbon, that could be a really good thing for this economy. So how can these sorts of mechanisms on kind of trialing these and seeing how the carbon drawdown technology could work in kind of, for example, the Omani context, that I don't think that's been looked at yet in terms of how it could be scaled up. So that could generate a whole new area of skills and expertise in the region. Sorry, the final point I think is to do with this emerging kind of a discussion around the hydrogen economy in the region. So Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Oman as well are looking at generating more green hydrogen, or all, the different color palettes of hydrogen, which I don't know all of them. But reusing that hydrogen in heavy industry, which is quite carbon intensive, could be quite an interesting avenue for the countries here to look at decarbonizing and on the pathway to net zero, while also having an export revenue that can potentially displace oil revenue and gas revenue in the future. So those are some of the areas that I think certainly worth looking at from a just transition perspective.
Thank you, Tanzid. I will certainly look into that. I didn't know about that research on the rock formations in Oman being having great potential in terms of carbon sort of storage. So thank you for that. Dr. Suad, if you could say something about the role of women in Oman, perhaps in terms of climate change sort of preparation, adaptation, and also maybe thinking about the wider idea of a just transition in the GCC economies, and if there might be some sort of issues there we can consider in terms of the increased role of women. Thank you.
Okay. About the role of Omani women, our research was about how the Omani women are engaged in the disaster management system in Oman. And we think about this research because of the UN priorities in Sendai, that there is gender equity for disaster management and risk reduction. And what we found it in Oman, and basically in globally, maybe this issue, that usually the men think that the women cannot do the big job in disaster management. And because they believe that they are one of the most vulnerable people, and based on the gender, they are highly vulnerable, socially vulnerable to the disaster. But what we found it when we do our research, and we do a survey for more than for about 500 persons from men and women, we found that when we asked them about how can they help during disaster, we found that most women, they have this ability of helping in a very local level, in houses or in their local community, by helping their families, by helping their neighbors during any disaster if they need. We found that the women, they have more ability to learn the first aid. They want to learn first aid because they believe that it will help them during emergencies or disasters more than men. and it was interesting that we found that women, they want to learn first aid more than men. It was strange for me why this, but we believe that maybe because they have this concern about their kids, about big people, the elder people in their family. Also, we found that the women during any disaster, in the pre-disaster, they have this high concern about the food. So they are thinking about the food security during disaster. So they believe that they need this and that more than men. So they have this ability for providing the needs, the list of the needs, what we needed during the disaster and what we don't need it. And mostly they focusing on bread, milk, like that. Especially if they have little kids. Also, we found that there is some challenges for the women to be engaged in disaster management system in Oman, and this challenges we noticed from men. Basically, they believe that women cannot do this because it's too dangerous for them. If there is a disaster, they're supposed to be in shelters or in safe places. And this should be done by men, not by women. And also they believe that because of the religion and the culture, men should do this. And this is one of the challenges that why we don't have too many women in disaster management system in Oman. And we give some recommendation for this, like better training and development for women to be able to at least be in a safe places or in a safe level during disasters. They have to be psychologically and socially developed to be able to act during disasters, because we found that this is one of the challenges, that sometimes women during disaster become more panicked because of the risk than men. They be afraid of what could happen to the kids, what could happen to their elder people more than men. It is important to increase the public awareness about the disasters in Oman and its impact in the community. And the awareness should be in many dimensions, in economically, financially, socially, psychologically, because what we note that after the disaster and everything is settled, some people, they have this post-disaster panic or psychological problems, and no one take care of them. And we found this very high between women and kids. And this is one of the issues that it needs to be focused on in Oman. So to make the community or the local community more resilient during a disaster, and also to be able to manage the risk better in the future. About the climate adaptation, actually we didn't ask them about the climate adaptation. We focused on the disaster. Basically, it's related to the climate, tropical storms, floods, and things about what could happen during this disaster, how to deal with this issue. And yes, what we found is that the role of Omani women during disaster is limited in the very local scale, and in the high scale, in the international scale, is still limited. And they need to be empowered more in the future in this area. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that, Dr. Suad. And also thank you for highlighting this issue about vulnerability. And this actually, I've got a couple of questions. Apologies if I can't ask them all, but I'll read the question now. This was from Jihad Al-Busaidi. I think adaptation is more a national issue than mitigation.
That's right.
Don't you think that countries that are more vulnerable to climate change, such as Oman and other countries in the region, should raise their voice internationally and drive the commitment towards adaptation finance? So in terms of, I think, the collective political sort of mobilization of the Arab countries, if whether through the Arab League or G77 sort of involvement, maybe within UNFCCC. Is any of our speakers like to respond to that?
Sure.
Sure,
I'm happy
Tanzee.
to have a start and others can jump in, obviously. Absolutely, I think it is a national issue in some sense. I think you develop national adaptation plans, but also there's some pretty common regional vulnerabilities to climate change, which would benefit from, even just efficiencies in investment in research. If there was a regional weather center which could help with developing common models for use across the region to assess the risks and vulnerabilities, that would be quite interesting to do something like that in the region. I think when it comes to the COP as well coming up in Egypt and also the one in the UAE, COP26 agreed this kind of global goal on adaptation, and that will have a lot of focus. And I think, some of the research that we've done shows that, yes, countries in the GCC have adaptation in their nationally determined contributions, but very few of them have translated them into national adaptation plans, let alone the financing that goes into implementing those plans. So, just in confidence, one of the countries we were interviewing, in the GCC, they developed a national adaptation plan, but actually they, because of COVID, that plan, the funding associated with that was taken away for them to implement it. So this shows that it's pushed down the pecking order adaptation. So I think raising the voice kind of nationally is really crucial to ensure that investment occurs and you don't just have a nice shiny report that gathers dust. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Tanzee. Waleed.
Yeah, I last week or maybe 10 days ago, I came across an article in The Economist about, again, the carbon, issue, or the hydrocarbon. Maybe probably is posing the same question that this panel is calling. But from what I have got is, I think there is a scenario that the GCC countries will continue and will accelerate, oil production for the next 20 years. And then after that, they will start, it's like, getting some time to really adapt for the, post-oil era, or adapting or trying to restructure their economies toward that, to an economy without oil. But I think that from the article, I think it's 2040, something like that, 2035 will be, there will be an acceleration for oil production, no reduction. But then after that, there will be a drop in that when you are really prepared and your economy is right. And if you look at countries like, Bahrain, just doesn't have a lot of oil, it has already started to move to that direction. Dubai has already started to move that direction. They don't want to have the oil as their main source of income, and that's how natural resources has been exploited. That you maximize the benefit from that natural resources until it depletes, and by that time you are preparing yourself for something like post that natural resource, and that's how things will go. I don't think there will be a quick shift, but what I would like to say is that I think the region has to really invest in research and development. It really lacks, this part is not that much being taken care, and you can't import technologies. I mean, you can't buy technology. You have to really invest in your institutes, in research centers, and try to find your own solutions. And from the negotiation of the COP, that the GCC were negotiating in the previous COPs that we need the technology. We need to have to transfer the technology to us. This is not going to happen. I mean, there is no way that the West will give you the technology, just free of charge. And I think what we have to do is really to invest in our R&D, make an R&D in desalination, R&D in carbon capture or sequestration. All these things need to be really, active research areas for us, so we can really face the next, 20 years a little bit comfortable.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I apologize to those who also want to ask questions. I think we have to finish now. But Aisha, I noticed you had a question that you were asking about, given that the GCC countries rely on hydrocarbons for economic revenues, and that these resources are also being used for climate change adaptation. How do they balance this low carbon energy transition and their needs for resourcing adaptation resilience, which I think Professor Walid has just sort of answered in a way by saying, well, in part by continuing to produce hydrocarbons and continue that resource stream. And then over time, 10, 20 years, moving into that sort of transition to a different economic structure, which will also then provide the resources for that continued adaptation, because it's a continual project, climate change adaptation, which will get even more challenging over time. So thank you very much for the speakers, for the panel. Shall I move back to you, Aisha, just to say thank you on behalf of the NUS?
Well, yes. So thank you very much, Michael, and to the speakers in the panel too. Yes, we come to the conclusion to this webinar today. Yes, thanks very much to the Middle East Institute events organizer, Sharon Kong, and also to the co-organization from the LSE Middle East Center. We appreciate it really. And I would like also on behalf of the Middle East Institute to say thank you to all the speakers who give us their time and shared their insights today. With that, we conclude the session for today, and I hope to see you next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Michael.
you.